Resume recording. Which one is this? Generosity?
Generosity.
Yes. All right, generosity. There's the waiting room. Admit all.
Welcome, friends. Thank you for coming. Thank you for taking some time to gather for what I hope is some thoughtful conversation. I've said before that the virtues are not new. They are well-polished tools for thinking. It's a good moment to have the reminder, that some things never go out of style. And so I have invited two of the most stylish people I know to speak today about generosity. Magdalena, Gabby, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us.
You want us to start? So
Please.
I'm going to introduce my good friend, Mr. Gabriella von Fredrichstahl, who I consider to be one of the most generous people alive. So Gabby, if you would like to say what you have to say.
Well, first, I am honored to have that distinction with you. That warms my heart. And I guess that is why people consider me generous, because, I take care of folks. So kind of just to start it off, I was provided the article by Duke Garrick, and I just want to read the very first sentence that he has for generosity. And it says, certainly a knight should hold open table and show largesse toward heralds, minstrels, and workers. These acts add to the grace and honor of the office and make the game more fun, both for those being rewarded and for those who observe the recognition. And so I'm going to speak about generosity as more of a hospitality, because that's kind of how I look at it. From just taking care of somebody, walking down the road at Lily's or Gofor's, they look like they're warm, they need something to drink, offer them a drink. Maybe make a feast for your entire, your kingdom. At one of my very first events was working in the kitchen in Three Rivers, and it warmed my heart, and I realized this was the place that I needed to be. Having a vigil table, whether it's just a few little bits of snacky things, you've got folks that are there that are going to be sitting sometimes all night. And for them to be able to have food and drink, to take care of them while they're waiting, that to me is not only generous, but it's showing hospitality to those that are around you. Whether you are a duke or duchess, the king or the queen, or a layperson that just started and it's their very first event. Make them feel welcome, make them feel at home. That's hospitality and generosity to me. So I'm going to turn it over to Magda for a little more.
Thank you, Gabby. So generosity is absolutely physical things that you share with other people. Sometimes the word charity is used, but I'd like to talk about generosity of spirit, less tangible sorts of generosity. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is generosity of heart, giving people the benefit of the doubt, opening your heart to people that you don't know well, or perhaps trying to get to know someone that you may have had a difference with in the past. Open your heart, be generous with your heart. Of course, nothing in all this should be to your own detriment. You shouldn't open up and offer your heart if it's going to be injured in doing so. But I think you'll find that the benefits in giving of your heart are more than equal to what the effort you put out. You should have a generosity of your time. We do a lot of things for people in the SCA, and it takes up our time. I could be sitting here reading a book instead of where I am right now, but I choose to be here. You choose to be here. We're giving up our time to spend time together. And even though maybe you don't see what you're doing right now as being generous, it is, because you could be doing something else and you're choosing to be here with us. and generosity of your knowledge. And I think the SCA focuses on this, and I like it. I like the generosity of our knowledge. When I learn how to do something, I'll teach a class. If I know something, I will tell people. It's not good to keep people in the dark. It's not good for people to, have you ever been like right there when there's a big old inside joke and you're the only one that doesn't understand? The SCA can be one big inside joke if you're new or you just weren't at that event that everybody's laughing about. So be generous with your knowledge and explain things to people and let them know, what's going on. So that's, to me, that's the two sides of generosity, the physical generosity and the less tangible generosity of spirit. And that's my whole presentation. So, I guess at this point we open it up to comments or questions or.
Absolutely. Thank you both for that beautiful introduction, comprehensive. Are there questions or comments from anybody?
Hey, I just wanted to comment on it that I've been blown away with the generosity we've already been shown. We're not even in Palantir yet, and we have so many friends that are looking out for us and offering to help with finding places to live and welcome us to the group, making introductions. That the generosity of the kingdom's already shown is just like really touched both of us a lot. It can be really hard because we're military. Palantir is going to be like my fifth kingdom, I think. And the generosity of the SCA as a whole has always been something that's been great to know is there. But Palantir has really shown a huge step in that, and that is almost a kingdom culture of caring for others. So we just wanted to throw that comment in there and say thank you to start off with.
Well, Joel and Yella, thank you for that generous comment. It really is, I think, part of our kingdom culture. Why do you think that is?
Our home is our living room. We open our purple pavilion at Foreign Wars and say, come on in, have a drink with us. Come and lounge on our pillows, on our friends' laps. We have soup. We have provisions to make you feel welcome and to sustain you. If you're not all the way back to your own home, come and sit with us for a few minutes, get something to eat, get something to drink, and then make your way back to your own camp so you can take a rest there. But know that we're here to take care of you.
I think some of it goes back to the roots of our kingdom, where we came from. I know that Elisette probably remembers when we were not even a kingdom yet. And we sort of felt like outsiders from the mid-realm, which is how we were created, how we became our own cohesive group, and then eventually a kingdom, is because we felt a little isolated. And I think there are two ways to react to feeling isolated. One is to be isolationist yourself, kind of that it was done to me, so I'm going to do it. But a great way to react to hardship is to rise up and do better. And I think that Palantir has always had the rise up and do better attitude. We're not going to be like that to new people and to people that come to visit us and people who come to live with us. So some of it is our childhood. Some of it is just being Midwesterners, maybe.
I think one of the things that has been important to me in establishing Palantir is remembering that those generosities don't always have to be very large things. They can be very small things. They can be talking to your neighbor encampment and saying, my water cooler is always open to you. They can be the little tiny good morning, do you have enough coffee today? Or I'm going to get ice, do you need a bag of ice? It's not always, you don't always have to do huge things. It can be a combination of those little itty bitty things on a daily basis that makes people like me and a lot of my friends feel very welcome in any Palantir encampment.
If I may, growing up in Callantyre and seeing generosity, I could walk to, like Rima was saying, I could walk to camp and just hang out for a hot minute and just bounce around. But I think I also have a weird view of the generosity of Callantyre because that's what I grew up in. And in the Outlands is also very generous. They have welcomed many foreigners with open arms, and they're like, go have fun, go be you. And that's what I love about the Outlands as well, is their generosity. And it mirrors what I grew up with in Callantyre.
And Your Grace, if I may add on to that, as someone who is not from Callantyre and didn't grow up around it, my first foray into the society was in a different kingdom, right at the tail end of college and right after I graduated. And I ran into a lot of some of the stereotypes that the society can have about peers being standoffish and expecting deference, and lots of old friendships that have solidified into cliques that were hard to navigate. And when I moved to Missouri and started to get back involved in the SCA after a 10-year gap, I returned to the game and came into Callantyre with some of those worries. And I have been so remarkably blown away and continue to be blown away at how my experience has been absolutely the opposite of that. Has been generosity of spirit. That's a new word. That's a
Good one.
It's old French, right? Generosity of spirit and time and encouragement, and it's something for that I will be forever grateful. And I think my point simply is that it's hard to know when and where and how your moments of generosity are going to land with folks. And yeah, sometimes it might go overlooked. Sometimes people might not appreciate it. Sometimes people may not notice it at all. But I'd encourage all of us, including jerks like myself, to keep that in mind, because sometimes your small acts, like Rima was saying, are going to have a really tremendous impact on people. I remember my first big event in about a decade was several years ago, and without naming people, I had an unexpectedly generous encounter with people I only later found out were peers, and that was a really formative introduction to Callantyre culture for me. That, looking back on it now, was just yeah, sure, come hang out in our camp. But that meant a lot to me as a brand new participant, a brand new person in Callantyre. So those small moments add up and can really be very meaningful for people. And it's a big reward, low cost sort of thing. Thank you.
You go ahead.
I very much agree. The big reward, low cost. I absolutely agree. And you're right. Things get overlooked, and you don't, or maybe you think they are. I have had people tell me stories. I've been in the SCA a long time, and I've had people tell me stories about something that I did years ago, and I don't remember it, but they're like, well, then you lent me a thing, or you gave me a glass of water, and it was such a non-issue to me at the time that I don't remember it, but that person remembered it. And I've also heard stories like that, even many more stories about other people doing the same thing. Well, so-and-so, gave me something or lent me something or showed me something. And that's why I decided to stick around, or that's why I decided to take up this art, or whatever. It doesn't matter, but it had an impact. And maybe someday those stories will trickle back to you, and they're huge wins when you hear them. Like, oh, really? I had that impact? That's wonderful. But you could I think it's got to be its own reward. I think you just have to kind of feel that warm feeling in your heart and move on, and not expect a thank you. And then when you do get one, it makes up for any you might not have gotten, I think. And I don't think people are ungrateful. I just think sometimes thank yous people don't get around to saying thank you, or they don't think until later, wow, that really made a difference to me. So yeah, I think that people's gratitude shows in a lot of different ways. And sometimes it pays forward.
Yeah, I've had similar situations like Magda has. Like Jurgen has provided some of us with little pelican coins, and just a simple, we have somebody who takes care of the retinue. We're doing lots of things behind the scenes to make sure that our crowns are great and beautiful and wonderful. We get thanks, and it's beautiful to have that too, but it's nice to be able to walk over to somebody who has made a meal for their majesties and open their home or their heart to an entire group of royals that might be at Lily's or Gold Floors or what have you, but have also taken the time to say, okay, retinue, come over here. We have some extra food right here. We've got some water. And I think, I have just little coins, or maybe it's a little token that I have. I carry little bumblebees around and give it to them. And it's amazing how much that makes somebody feel worthy and important. And to me, it's just a little token, but it's something that I feel is so important, because now that person is going to be like, oh my gosh, maybe I can do some other things. Maybe I can show somebody else how to do a meal for their majesties, or bring the retinue in to do other things. I love new retinue members. When somebody's like, I want to help, but I don't know how. Well, follow me, my friend. You can help me do some retinue shifts, and I'll show you how to do it. And they love it because they see that behind the scenes that makes magical moments for everybody else. And that's, to me, what generosity is. It's making the magic happen for those around you.
Yeah.
I think we have a really lovely culture of pay it forward here that I always enjoy. I love to give gifts. Gift giving is one of my love languages. And I just give gifts with no expectation to get something back. But somehow or another, it seems like when I bring a gift to an event for somebody else brings a gift for me. And I don't do it for that, but it's new people are often surprised. Oh, well, what do I owe you for this? Or let me give you a thank you, or just do something nice for somebody else. And when so many people are doing that, it just comes around in a big circle. And I love that generosity that I see here. Makes me happy.
So I've been trying to sort of figure out how to word this in a polite way, but I feel maybe I need to add a word of caution of ascribing the good actions of individuals on the kingdom's culture itself. If we were discussing virtues as if they were something that is true for everybody, then they wouldn't be virtuous. And my experience with Meere Callantyre was certainly punctuated by people being very generous, but also the opposite. And I peeked through who was here, and I think it's worth considering that the people who are going to be sitting around on their Sunday trying to have discussions and think about the virtues are the people who perhaps are more attentive to them. So I think it's be careful that you're not surrounding yourself with good people and then only seeing that side of it.
I appreciate you saying that. I was just about to say, this has been a lovely little, and I'm not going to use a really vulgar term. This has been a lovely little, like circle pat on the back. But we can do things better. And does anybody have any ideas for ways we can do things better? I don't want to gripe about individuals at all. I don't think that's very generous. But there are ways that we can be better. And if you don't want to say a way that you think you can be better, but just think about a way that you can be better. I know I can be better. That's actually something that I've been really trying to internalize recently on a different subject, but I can be better. And even if you're someone who really strives to do well, you can always strive to do better. So if anybody has any ideas for better, that would be a great thing to talk about now.
Magda, I'd like to actually, and this is Verena, I guess our video cut out.
I can hear.
I'd like to go back to what you said earlier was we have a culture that is tightly knit. There's a lot of tradition, and it can feel like hanging around a big inside joke. And it feels good for the people who are in on it, and being personally generous in explaining the inside joke to new folks is something that personally we can do. And I think we also need to evaluate those facets of that culture, of that sense of tradition, that might be themselves less welcoming. And I think it's great that we seem to maybe have a foot up on some other places in the known world, but I agree that it's always better to look forward and ask ourselves how we can be better. And I think there's a certain amount of that close-knitness that can be kind of with a certain amount of concern about overusing the word exclusionary that can, you know, make people feel a little bit confused about what's going on. And I think also not to bring up something that has been covered ad nauseum, but things like Lily's. Where do you camp at Lily's? Where do you camp at Lily's if you've never been there before and you don't know someone? And maybe you're not from a local group in Kingdom who says, yeah, camp with me and my summer cousins. Where do you go? Do you look at the map? And I think that's, you know, we all know each other and we have our traditions. Can have a bit of a dark side as well, especially if we don't make it very obvious what those are.
So this is Eleanor, and I was made a peer in Callantyre, and I feel like I am a Callantyre person. But I didn't start in the SCA in Callantyre. And when I first moved here, the first year of being in Callantyre was very, very difficult. No one would talk to me. I don't mean that in a bad way, simply because I'm an introvert. It's hard for me to talk to people I don't know as well. I'm not faulting anyone for that. I have started, and Colin has been helping me with this, when I see people coming in from other kingdoms and I know, and I don't always, because I'm usually, frankly, sometimes I have my head stuck up my rear. But when I notice that somebody has come in from a different kingdom, I will attempt to let them know that if you're coming from a different kingdom and you don't look like you need help, you're going to have to reach out of your own place of introversion and talk to people. Because in the Midwest, apparently, especially I think, if you don't look like you don't need help, people are not going to approach you. They are going to respect your autonomy, your independence, your personal space in a way that maybe they don't in other kingdoms. Or maybe it's just because I started as a completely new person in a different kingdom and looked totally helpless, like a baby rabbit under a fox. But that sense of being Callantyre isn't innate. And especially if you're coming in from a place where you're not completely new, you don't look brand new, you don't look like you need help, sometimes it can be hard to find that group of people that make you feel welcome and at home and part of the group. That said, the thing that I can do better, which makes me absolutely nauseous, is to talk to more people I don't know. I don't look like somebody that's an introvert because I'm very extroverted with the people that I know. The people that I don't know, I'm so awkward. I'm so awkward with people I don't know. Oh, and I have to say, Gabby, just so that everybody knows, Gabby made me a laurel shortbread for my elevation. For my vigil table, I have a picture. I never got to see the whole thing. There's a beautiful picture of a laurel wreath made out of shortbread. So yeah, generosity, there's a lot of generosity in this kingdom. It's generosity of spirit and generosity of giving and things. And everybody in this kingdom, when they're elevated, they get a vigil. They get a vigil table. They get a cloak. They get some sort of other regalia that shows who they are. And I recognize that this is just for peerage, but people at the grant level and people who are doing things, when you give of yourself, you receive back from this kingdom. People recognize what you give. But getting started, not always that easy. So, sorry to break up the love fest, because I do love it here. But there are some things where we could be better, as Magda says.
I can add something else that Frey and I have been talking about as far as to be better. This idea of being generous to new people and being generous to the friends and those that you surround you with, that part's easy. What takes it to a different level is when you can extend that generosity to people who, well, frankly, you don't like. The society is big. There are going to be people that we disagree with. There are going to be people that personalities just don't mix. Generosity can't stop at people that you just don't like. Obviously, there are some things that are just absolute deal breakers, and the society is dealing with things like that right now. But different personalities, you have to figure out how to work within that and continue to extend that generosity regardless of certain personal feelings.
Thank you. Yes, I really think that's correct. Thank you for saying that.
Aiden here. I'm jumping in here real quick. For anybody that's interested, the article that Gabby mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, I threw up into the chat function. It's from Duke Garrick. Anybody interested in the Knights of the Virtues should go read that article, and then they should reread it, and they should probably read it again. He speaks somewhat at length about courtesy, and his second paragraph, he speaks about the harder virtue of courtesy, and one that it's a hard lesson for me to learn whenever I was first made it, is that my words can kill. Anybody that knows me understands that I operate on a 12-year-old boy in a locker room mentality. So if I like you and I'm comfortable with you, chances are I'm probably going to insult you and probably pull your hair and whatnot. Well, in a more polite society, that is not the way most people interact. And I think a way to be better with the virtue of generosity is to remember not only do our small acts of kindness reflect positively upon us, our small words of diskindness or short quips or being short with somebody or even just blowing them off can have long-lasting detrimental effects, not only to your own personal honor, but to the kingdom and the society as a whole. So that's a hard lesson that I always have to keep saying to myself as a peer and as a representative of Callantyr, is that, what I might think is personally funny is maybe not necessarily so funny to somebody else. And while they won't call me out on it, they will certainly go back to their camp and talk about that Callantyr asshole who made fun of them or blew them off or, didn't make them feel welcome.
I'd like to address the previous comment. Aiden, you're not wrong. And even that's not wrong, although, so I think we're just it feels like to me, we're kind of discussing two different things with these groups. And one is how do we do these virtues as a person? The other is just a technical discussion of the virtues and what those entail. And from that standpoint, I think we're drifting into mercy as opposed to generosity.
And also courtesy.
And the thing about mercy is nobody deserves mercy. Literally. That's why it's mercy. If they deserve it, it's justice.
So question, this is Awith. I have been told before that I will always say this word wrong, and Magda is going to laugh at me. My franchise is not the right term, and Magda's going to laugh at me. So Magda's going to tell me how to say that.
Show mercy, Magda. Show mercy.
Show mercy.
Franchise.
Can someone explain their idea of what the difference between that and mercy and generosity is? Because when the royal peer who first told me that, I was like, oh, I've never heard this word. I'm gonna go look up this virtue. I don't understand why you wouldn't tell me that I was generous or hospitable or one of the other virtues. So what is the difference between that and the other virtues?
So I'll take a shot at this, and you know, I'll grant that my views are always not in line with the vast majority. So take this for what it's worth. For me, franchise is the application of all of the virtues, each in their own order. So in some ways, I find it to be one of the most important virtues. It's often defined as noble bearing, but you can't have noble bearing without utilizing the virtues themselves. And so for me, franchise is the application of mercy when appropriate, the application of justice when appropriate, the application of courtesy when appropriate, and each in their own turn to the appropriate amount. That to me is franchise. It is what makes your bearing what it is.
I would like to add that it also implies an embodiment. If you live the virtues because it looks good, that is not franchise. If you live the virtues because you believe them, that is franchise. The word franchise, if you look at it, it looks like franchise, like when you buy a McDonald's and you run it. So and that's not a coincidence. Ownership. These are a part of you. There's an ownership of these virtues that you maintain. It's not an act. It's not a game. It's real. That's franchise to me.
It's easiest for me to explain to people who are military or at least military adjacent, because the example that I give for talking about franchise, you can walk into a PX on any military base and look around at people who are wearing civilian clothes, and you can absolutely 100% identify those who are lower enlisted, those who are NCOs, and those who are officers, because they carry themselves differently without any other outside markings. That's franchise.
So this is Arthur here chiming in.
Brother, I haven't
Everybody,
seen you forever.
yeah, it's been a while. Good to see everybody. You know, as we're going along, everybody's saying this is what it means to me, and we should. We have to internalize and make these part of our own lives. Make it part of the fabric of who we are. So that is good. A thing that I think we need to do too, though, is go back and ask ourselves, where did these ideas originate in the historic setting, in the text that we have available? And franchise is a difficult one because it doesn't show up in many of the period listings of, you know, the virtues. It doesn't show up in Lull, for example. It doesn't show up so much in Charnay and some of the others. And if you go into some of the academic works on this, for instance, Morris Keene's seminal work, Chivalry, he only mentions the word 3 times. And I think building on what everybody else says, the idea of noble bearing, the idea of belonging, the idea of you know it when you see it, as Grace Donegal has suggested, that's all part of it. And the root, as Magdalena has said, goes back to, you know, this idea of belonging. You have a piece of the pie, you have a piece of the bigger corporation, and it has its roots in the, you know, the word Frank, meaning, you know, the tribe of people from that region. And so this idea that it is a distinct and separate virtue, I think, is a very SCA thing, and perhaps not one that we would find lined out quite so brightly in period. So those are my thoughts on franchise.
We've had a delightful sneak preview of, I think it's actually next week, virtue discussion, but it's also a good example of how one of the comments that's been made previously is absolutely, you know, showing its colors here, that is, all of the virtues are related. And I'm going to bring it back and say, so when is something that appears to be generosity not generosity, or not virtue, not very virtuous? Small virtue instead of big virtue.
Kirk, or Hirsch, if I could, this is Rockland. I think an example of that is generosity that is performed to get somebody to do things the way you want to do them, to do things the way you think they should be done. I was thinking about generosity a while ago, and I was thinking one of the ways that one should be personally generous is to give people space to be different and give people space to do things and see things differently. There are extremes that, as we're seeing in our modern world, where it's like, okay, your difference of opinion just makes you an asshole. But within our own context, not everybody needs to approach the society, needs to approach art, needs to approach citizenship within the society the way I do. And for me to very generously give them advice on how they should change is, to me, borders on hubris. We don't know necessarily who they are or where they're coming from. So perhaps our advice is actually just being insulting. And we should give people the space to find it for themselves and express it in the way they need to be whole. Your mileage might vary.
Thanks, Rockland. I like that description. I think one of the things, getting back to Hirsch's question, is when is generosity not generosity? Is when there's an underlying motive, when it's not truly genuine. If you're doing something for the purpose of a reward down the road, that's not generosity. That's politics. Generosity is when you have something to give and you can give it, and you choose to do so because it's the right thing to do. And just to, because I have to, just to touch on before, all of the other virtues, like what Arthur was saying, pretty much have definitions of them. You can look up what generosity means in the dictionary. You can look up what prowess means. Franchise is very, it's very open-ended, but it is definitely one that you know when you see it. And it, I fully admit, when I got knighted, I had no idea what franchise, still don't really, but I know it when I see it. And same thing with generosity. If I see somebody doing something that doesn't feel genuine, then I'm not necessarily going to say that they're being generous. I'm going to say they're doing something else. And, maybe that makes me a jerk for being that way, but
I have a gentle argument against that, and I think that is an overlay of, it's kind of a Protestant Christian overlay on the view of that. I think from a strictly medieval standpoint, deeds not words. If I build a hospital for children, you literally don't care why I did that. The hospital exists. It is a good act in and of itself. It is generous.
Oh, I agree, and I think that brings in another thing that we don't often think about is, I mean, the majority of us, are coming at the SCA as modern Americans, 21st century Americans, but these issues were set down by people who came from a much more stratified society. So, if your lord was generous, then you might
eat that day.
Yeah, you would have feast days, and you would get a coat every Michaelmas or whatever, and that's the generosity of your lord. If your lord isn't generous, then he is his people aren't getting stuff, but he's getting stuff.
It's an interesting philosophical discussion of whether or not you can be generous without also being entirely altruistic.
I think
I can give you a coat as my vassal. I give you a coat every year because I need you to survive the winter. I build a children's hospital because I need the tax write-off. There are 100 reasons to be generous. Not the least of which, the one that I think is, I can't necessarily call it the most valuable, but the most genuine, is because it feels good to be generous. It feels good to give of your time to a worthwhile charity or cause. It feels good to stand up for your fellow man if they're being trod upon. It feels good to do right and to give of yourself for the right thing. But I don't know that generosity requires that altruism.
Well,
So to continue,
I disagree with that simply because I think in order for it to be a virtue, it has to have a basis of underlying of goodness. Otherwise, otherwise it's not a virtue. It's not virtuous.
But you seem to be implying that it's only virtuous if it involves personal sacrifice. And that's where I'm arguing with where you seem to be coming from.
But to take that point and circle it back to Hirsch's point earlier about the virtues being so interrelated, I have a question for my betters here, in so much as where the delineation between generosity and noblesse is. Because my understanding, limited as it is those two seem, in my head, to be very, very connected, where noblesse oblige, will help me, Magda, I'm mispronouncing this left and right.
Noblesse oblige.
Thank you. Is the expectation and the virtue of showing your noble standing and bearing by taking care of your social lessers and the people who have obligations to you and expectations. So where's the contrast and comparison and similarities there?
I think noblesse oblige is not a virtue at all. I think it's an expectation of social standing.
It's an obligation.
I do think that what Duncan has said and what Hugo has said bring up the question of there's no answer, but where is the dividing line? Where's the line for you between what was implied earlier as a manipulative sort of generosity, where you're just giving to get something out of somebody, or the, okay, I'm going to get a tax break, is that, where on that line does it become a virtue? To all the way to, this is a sacrifice. I am giving you my last dollar, or I'm giving you 2/3 of my meal. And obviously nobody's going to argue that last one is virtuous, to give to your own sacrifice. But I don't think we have to sacrifice every time we're generous. I don't think it requires generosity. Generosity always requires sacrifice. So where on the line does it become a virtue?
So His Majesty was talking earlier about it feels good to give. It feels good to be generous, and it does. It does in a lot of ways. But when it stops becoming generosity, in my opinion, is when you stop enjoying it. Then it's a sacrifice. It's something that you don't exactly want to do anymore, but you're still doing it. And I'm not sure, there's probably a lot more to that I'm not really putting into words right now. But when you enjoy doing something and you're giving out of the generosity and your only return is that it makes you feel good, that's my version of true generosity.
But is sacrifice virtuous?
Sometimes.
I think it often is, yeah.
Yeah.
I think sometimes, but I think there is a so as a pelican, and even before I was a pelican, there was a lot of, I'm doing this because I have to, and other people thought I was being generous because I had a smile on my face. Nobody understood that at the end of the day, I would go back to my tent and I would completely break down, whether it was with my household, whether it was with my friends, whether it was with my close companions. I would completely break down because the giving of everything that I had done for that week, for that event, for that activity. And so I struggle with that a lot of like, was that truly, or was that something I was doing because I was now a peer of the realm, or because I was a cross of Callantyr? And so other people saw that as being generous and saw that as being very quote unquote peer-like. But at the end of the day, I went back to my tent and lost my shit, to be unpeer-like in my language, right? So what is that balance of being generous because it feels good, where I have plenty of situations where that is absolutely the case, but I also have almost an equal number of situations where I wish I hadn't had to be that person.
The SCA is kind of weird, right? Because we love the society, because we love people who participate in it. The people on this call and many people we know give of themselves to the point of self-flagellation. And I hesitate to call that genuinely virtuous, right? If you give until you have literally nothing to give, it's more self-punishment than it is giving because the person receiving it needed it. It's giving almost because you needed the punishment. I don't know. That thought's not solidified yet. But last week we discussed that virtues in period and modernly were a net benefit to the society at large. I think giving of yourself, or of your money financially, giving your time, those are things that can be a net positive regardless of whether or not they provide benefit back to you. Using Donegal's example of building a children's hospital, it's a net benefit to society that is built regardless of whether or not I get a tax break at the end of the day. If we're discussing this in the context of what it means to each of us individually, or what it means to a society, I think those are slightly different conversations, but both have value, I guess. I don't know where I was going with any of this. I just thought that I needed to say that you can be generous regardless of having an ulterior motive, so long as it has a net benefit to society.
And I completely agree with you, Your Majesty. There are a lot of things I do in the mundane world that I really don't like to do. Okay. And there are things I have to tell people that I don't really like to tell them. But I understand that in correlation with the mundane world and the SCA world, I know that it is for a greater good. And I think that part of being generous you know, I enjoy making things for people because I love seeing their faces. I do. It's a stupid, crazy, addictive high, and I love doing it. And I'm very passionate, and I get very close to the projects I make, and probably a little too much. But the way I want to see other people doing that. I want to see other people get addicted to the high. And I think Callantier specifically does a really good job of teaching, of trying to tell, show people you can do this thing and you can make it and get really good at it and make it for all the people and you can see all their faces and be happy and yay. But at the same, I'm trying to figure out how to English, I'm sorry. I don't know. I feel that it's important to allow other people the opportunity to be generous. And I think we sometimes fail a little bit in saying, oh, I really want to do this really bad, but I'm going to let you have the opportunity to do this. And I think, and it bounces back to Magda's opening statement of how do we make things better? We give up other people the opportunity to make them better. And I think that is really just as generous as doing the thing yourself. And it's just as generous to do that. And anyway, I think that's where I was going with that.
Funny story, and Gabby can back me up on this. Years ago, we had a winter court.
What?
Gabby and I were both in the kitchen doing dishes. This is, after we've both been in about 20 years. And someone came up to me and said, get out, and threw me out of the kitchen. And I walked over and I sat down at a table. And Gabby came over 2 minutes later and looked at me and said, you just get kicked out of the kitchen? Yep. You? Yep. Well, I guess it's time to let somebody else do the job. And
it's
both
the
of us.
hardest thing to do, but you have to. It's hard. It's hard to give that up, but you have to let little birds fly. You've got to give them the opportunity to fly, right? That's why we're here. We're here to nurture and to give. That's our generosity, is to let others be able to fail, or you aren't giving them the opportunity to have greatness. So be there to hold them, but they've got to fly on their own at some point.
And there will be.
I totally agree. And it is the generosity to let other people do the things that you really want to do. It's like, wait, I wanted to do this and I want it to be all mine. Oh, wait, I should share. And
It's so hard.
Even better. Well, when you could, I have become such a fan of collaborative projects, because when you share the opportunity to create a vision, everybody feels better and everybody gets better and everybody will then go out and do better. So, it is part of our job is to go forth and sometimes kick the little birds out of the nest. It's like, time for you to fly, baby. At least in art.
I think a little bit back to what Aowith said about, how hard it was for her to give. I think it's important to remember that your generosity should not necessarily be at your own expense. Fill your own cup, put on your own oxygen mask first. Sacrifice can be generosity, but just because you're sacrificing doesn't make it generous. And generosity doesn't have to be a sacrifice either. These things generosity doesn't have to hurt. It should feel good, hopefully.
It comes back to, being able to moderate yourself enough. So you have to be kind you should be kind to everybody, including yourself. If you're, if you're sacrificing so much that you're hurting yourself, it's
contagious.
You're not, you're not being generous to yourself either. But if you're not, but if you're keeping all the glory to yourself by your sacrifice, that's not, in my view, generous either, because you're not, like has been said before, you're not sharing that opportunity. So it's a level of moderation between too much and too little, and I don't know. I got lost there. Sorry.
And you pace yourself. Like, that's the thing. Generosity is a virtue that you can hurt yourself with. And don't.
Couldn't agree more.
And if you hurt yourself and you're not there in the future, is it really being that generous to the game because you're short-lived? You're not giving of yourself for as long as you can.
Right. And often when we burn out, we burn others on our way out. And so that's not
Right,
always good either.
If you give all of your water to somebody else and you die of dehydration,
right,
it's not going to work.
Right. It's still generous. It's just dumb.
I think there's a lot to be said for the, I guess I'm bringing it back to the beginning, those smaller acts and teaching others about the little bits of the generosity. I would love to make every single newcomer mug and see my pottery in everyone's hand, but I'm not physically capable of that. So instead, maybe I buy a new potter a box of clay. I would love to, like Maria, I see you there. I want to make those things and give those things, but enabling other people to do that as well is sometimes a more generous way of me giving back to the kingdom, because I realize that I can't always do all the things. It would be self-sacrificing, but learning those lessons can be so difficult that having this discussion, I think, has been really impactful.
Rima, that is fantastic. I agree with you. The sensation of, I want to do this thing. I want to give everybody a mug that I made would be phenomenal. But like Magdalena said a moment ago, you are the only person who can stop yourself from burning out. And if you burn yourself out, you're more likely to singe somebody on the way out. And if you can find that moment that takes where you let yourself step back and say, no, please go ahead and do this. And you don't force all of your advice on them. But when they come to you for advice, you give help if they need help, and take help if they're, giving help. I have learned so much by it. Sometimes it feels the opposite of generous when I say no, I can't help with this, or no, I can't do this, no, I can't take on this right now. I might be feeling like I don't have time to take on one more thing. And but then when somebody else takes it on as a leadership position and then asks for help, I'm able to contribute, and a lot of times I learn from that. So I get to grow doubly as someone else gets to grow. To me, that's one of the truly lovely pieces of generosity, is the sharing of learning. This has been a great conversation. I am thinking about closing the conversation. I appreciate everything everyone has said. There's been a ton of great comments in the chat. I'm going to see if I can find a good way to put those up as part of the, I don't know, we'll see. Probably not. I'm going to end like I usually do, with a thing and a toast. And the thing that I have, Magdalena will recognize, this is a 13th century ring. It was a prize. Duke Garrick awarded me this at the end of a tournament, and I gave it to Magdalena. It is hers. I don't consider that act to be generous. That wasn't generosity. That was me making my saving throw, my wisdom save. But Duke Garrick giving away a piece of genuine medieval history that's 800-ish years old was delightfully generous, and I treasure this, just as I treasure gifts from many, many more people and the friendship of each and every one of you. For today's toast, we have a Côte de Rhône, a fine wine from very near our duchy, I would say. My friends, my dear friends, to your health.
To your health.
Salud.
Thank you, as always, Hirsch. This has been wonderful.
Thank you, Gabby.
Thank you, guys.
To my home away from home.
Yeah,
It's a great conversation this week. Thank you all.
That was fun.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Magda, are you still there? They came by this morning and dropped off my scroll and my lark.
That is phenomenal.
I was so
That's
excited.
awesome.
They had court in the morning yesterday, and I almost didn't get out of bed to watch it. And I was like, no, I'll get up. And I heard my name in court, and I couldn't believe it. I was so excited. I didn't even know that anybody noticed who I was here.
That's awesome.
Exceptional. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.